we hold on to why things go wrong and our memories of problems way, way, way longer
Yeah.
than any surprise or delight initiative.
Yeah.
Because all this rumination thing is linked to our survival instinct a little bit. And so if you remove that, if people go, oh, you showed up when I needed you and you made it easy and helpful, regardless of what happens, I am sticking with you because you saved me when I
Yeah.
needed saving.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Deep Learning with PolyAI. Today with me, I've got Adrian Swinscoe of Punk CX. And kind of like in talking, I'm really excited about this one and in general about your role and kind of like the role of kind of like just looking at CX in relation to technology and what it can do to promote a better interaction between companies and their customers. There's a lot to it. I'd love to hear. Well, first off, welcome on board, and I'd love to hear the background story of how you ended up doing what you're doing.
So I left corporate world in 2004. So as of the date of recording, it's September 2025, and I'll have been working independently now for 21 years. And so the first few years of that, I was just doing various sort of consultancy sort of kind of jobs. Some of it was in that kind of corporate venturing space. Nearly bought a steel company as part of that. So, I mean, that's another story for another day. But when I was thinking about that whole thing, and I thought, well, actually, I need to do something that I really care about, or even focus on something that I really care about, or something I wanted to change. And it struck me that I don't like bad service. You know,
What
um,
experience? What experience prompted it? There must have been one pivotal
oh
one.
no. It's an accumulation of things. Like having kind of built and developed sort of like things that had employee and customer value at their heart in the past. It always kind of struck me that it's oftentimes organizations get in the way of their people doing a good job, right? And so that's why I wanted to say is like, well, actually, let's see if because I have this idealist utopian sort of view of things that if we make services, bad service is tough for the people that are trying to do well by their customers, and it's tough for their customers, and it affects us all. And I thought, well, actually, why don't I kind of try and investigate this, look into it, try and come up with clues of how we can do that. And so, since about 2007, 2008 through to now, I've written crumbs over 1,000 articles, 4 books, had a podcast since 2011, do a lot of talks, all blah blah blah, all these different things. I'm still finding clues, and increasingly over the last few years, a lot of it's involved technology in terms of thinking about how we can use technology in the mix to try and drive those better outcomes. Because that's ultimately that's the thing that I'm really interested in is how do we drive better outcomes for our customers, our employees, and then ultimately our businesses.
Yeah. So when you think about kind of like driving those outcomes with technology, I mean, does technology sometimes get in the way? Much kind of like how
Oh,
companies.
100%. 100%.
Give us an
Um,
example of that.
and and it's not the technology's fault, obviously, because technology is not yet a sentient being, right? Um, but I remember going to go into an event where I quoted some research, and the research from Gartner was that, recent research, I think it's from last year, that said, say 70% of customers say that they want to self-serve. And that's great. I think technology has almost like taught us how to do
Yeah.
that. Um, but yet only 17% of those customers were able to solve or achieve their jobs that they wanted to do using the self-service facilities. And then when you looked at even the most simple queries or inquiries, that number only went up to 30%.
Yeah.
So you look at it and just go, oh, now it's not necessarily the technology's fault. It's almost like how it's been designed and sort of implemented and architected and all
I
that
can't
sort of stuff.
believe that 70% still prefer to self-serve. Because to me, that was always interesting, like that feedback loop. Because if it's that bad, why would they prefer, right? And that's why I think a lot of them still prefer calling and kind of like trying to get to a human. Although, again, that human is often stopped from doing the right thing by the company as well. So it's
Oh yeah, I think we're completely conditioned by our environment, by our experience. So it's a bit like if we've sent an email and then you just go, uh, you've been waiting for days, if not weeks, for a reply or whatever. There's no auto acknowledgement where it sort of sets and manages your expectations. Then it's a bit, or you go on to try and call somebody and then you're in this IVR sort of doom loop type
Yep,
of
yep, yep.
thing, or you're not somebody's you're like going, why isn't somebody giving me a callback option, or why isn't somebody not telling me kind of how long the estimated time to wait is? I mean, these are just bits of information that has been around. We see it in public transportation right now. We're like going, oh, bus is coming in X that time, or train's coming at X time. And that stuff, that information, that wayfinding in that sort of whole experience helps people manage their expectations, right? But yet it's been missing from that whole service sort of space. And so people are going, oh, I don't want to go and do that because I don't understand how long I'm going to wait or when I'm going to get answered or so on. Or I don't want to send an email because that feels like it's going into a black hole because nobody's auto reply and manage my expectations. And so you end up getting forced to other routes. Some people default to going, I'm going to scream on social media because that's the best way to get attention. But some people go like, well, I don't want to do that. I'm more interested in solving my problem rather than screaming,
Yeah.
right? And so I think we've been conditioned by our environment, and I think that a lot of that comes back to how much attention and also respect that we give the role of the whole service and support function within a business.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not get into the idea that even though now the contact center or the help desk or the support desk is the biggest and the fastest growing real time data set of any company anywhere. If you want to know what's going on in your business, go and speak to them over there.
Yep, yep. So I mean that's really interesting one, and maybe it's a segue into one of the things that we hope to discuss. A lot is made of kind of like data literacy in these
Mm-hmm.
deployments. I think that, especially with agents on the phone, through chat, able to, and this is a personal fascination of mine, like if you think of like the roll call in a contact center and say you had like 10 hypotheses you wanted to explore, it's really hard to get like 10,000 people, line them up and say, okay, half of you do this and half of you do this. And now for this other thing, I want half of you to do this and half of you to do this, right? It's just really hard to get those kinds of experiments through a human workforce, but it's much easier with AI because all you need to do is like programming into the voice agent. But going back to the data literacy, and you mentioned kind of like all you have to do is ask. In a way, like the danger there, and I think many would say is if you ask only those people calling you among your customers, you're going to get a very skewed data set towards those that are calling you, mostly because they have a problem, really,
Sure.
right? Or like, it's a well-known thing with CSAT that you really get outliers responding much more than the average person who's had maybe an okay time, maybe not. You kind of want to know both, but how do you go about like instilling this like data literacy? Because I've been surprised by how even in our teams, people with maths degrees aren't necessarily trained in that kind of maths, and the discipline has not been, forged into them. I think if I hadn't done a PhD where I had, one person I worked with very closely who was positively fascist about doing those things right, I wouldn't have known, right?
Right.
And how do you like spread that institution?
I mean, I think it comes back to leadership and kind of just people in general. I mean, because I think that for the longest time we've, you know, I think one of the big skills that we don't have in leadership, we don't sort of necessarily nurture it as much as possible. One is humility,
Mm.
and the other one is curiosity. And how you fuse those two things together with time to be able to go and find out actually what's kind of going on and to ask those thought questions or those things that are like, let's go and find out about what's going on over here.
Yeah.
Let's go ask some people. Because what we do is we default to what we think is expertise, and it might be hard expertise around data or engineering or technology or whatever, but we
Yeah.
don't see human insight as hard.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example. I remember I spoke to a friend of mine who was working on a mortgage improvement project for a big bank, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, okay, fine, we're going to go and gather all the data and we're going to analyze all the data to try and identify what the biggest problems are with the kind of the mortgage application kind of like process. And so they gathered all the data, and they got the big data analytics and continuous improvement team, and they took the data and they went away and they squirreled away for about 6 weeks to come up with recommendations, identification, whatever was going on. This was before generative AI, so it was a few years ago. And then, and while they were away doing the work, one bright spark in the contact center turned around and said, "Why don't we just get 15 to 20 agents together in a room, give them teas and coffees and a tray of donuts, and tell their team leaders to go away so they could speak freely and say, right, I want you to tell me what are the top 10 problems in the whole kind of the whole mortgage application process." They listed them out. Then the data analytics team came back 6 weeks later and they realized there was an 80% fit between what the agents had seen and what the data analytics team had seen. So here's my question. My question would be, as leaders, would you like to be 80% right and only out the cost of a bunch of teas and coffees and a tray of donuts, and so you can just get started and you can learn as you go by employing or leveraging the network of biological supercomputers that you have at your kind of control?
That's exactly.
Or would you like to wait 6 weeks and spend hundreds of thousands of pounds or euros or whatever to come back and have things absolutely nailed on?
What is the right answer?
Well, if you want to build a culture of experimentation and collaboration and all of those good things, I would say I'd start with the first one, involving your people, and then refine as you go. Because everything I think in this game is about momentum.
Yeah,
You've got to take people with you. We see all this research around when people are talking about technology implementations, or whether it's any big transformation projects, where the famous stat from McKinsey is like 70% of all transformation projects fail.
yeah.
If you dig into that, the reason why they fail is largely because they haven't managed the communication, the change, the vision.
Yeah.
They're taking people with you a bit. And because it feels soft, but it's not soft. In the words of Tom Peters, the legend that is Tom Peters, is like, what is soft is hard when it comes to organizational kind of change. And we should, lest we forget that, we need to kind of lean on that. And it's even more so right now with if we want to harness the potential of artificial intelligence.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think that, how you measure, what you measure. And I mean, the reason I asked which one is right, I mean, obviously you always want to keep like positive momentum and moving forward. And I think a lot of the times when people kind of like pay for those projects, they're again like asking incomplete questions. So it's not going to be 100% in any case. It may be higher. But I mean, some mix of the two when done dynamically and often is probably the best. But when you go back to like the CX fundamentals, and I've looked at kind of like places where, one thing that we at board level, I've always had questions, and initially I tried to answer, and then it's very complicated, and then it got to like, I have a better view now, but a universal view of kind of like what good looks like for our clients is very different depending on the industry, right? Mm-hmm. Some measure it in revenue uplift, some measure it in the hundreds of people that they would need extra to service a demand during a certain peak hour, right? Others look at like the value of data insights for like demand curves that they have. But like when you go back to those CX fundamentals and looking at what really matters, when you kind of like work with a new client, what do you look for first? What do you look to learn about first in like the CX estate of a company?
So I oftentimes, more often than not, I start with service. And the reason why I start with service is, one, because I've always been interested in the idea of service. But I also kind of think that service is one of the things that we can control, right? People talk about we want to create a great customer experience. You're like, yeah, that's fine. But ultimately, you don't have any control over that. Because the reality is there's stuff that happens and there's what we make it mean. Right? Yeah. Two different people can have two very different days and can have exactly the same experience, and then will feel very, very differently about it. Right? So what we have to then focus on, I always think we have to focus on understanding what we can control.
Yeah.
And what we can control directly is how we serve people. And that might be informed by what our customers are telling us and how we respond to that. But ultimately, I go and try and look at what's working, kind of where the failure demand is. Where are the kind of, what are people asking you about? Is there a better way of responding to those, to those questions? Are we making that as easy as kind of like possible? Are we creating our own kind of problems? Those type of things. And a lot of the time that comes from both the data, but also comes from just talking to people and understanding how they kind of work and also how things connect to each other. And so that's, for me, I think that's because if you can turn around and actually think about, then you can start to really define what the basics means for that brand. Because from a customer and a psychological perspective, here's the interesting thing: is like people talk about, oh, we should be really focused on wowing and delighting our customers. You're like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
Again, you have no real control over that, but you have control over whether you show up and can
Yeah.
solve somebody's problem. Right. Here's also the psychology behind it: is that, and this is a fascinating thing. A thing that I've learned and fascinated by is that we hold on to why things go wrong and our memories of problems way, way, way longer
Yeah.
than any surprise or delight initiative.
Yeah.
Because all this rumination thing is linked to our survival instinct, a bit like, oh, what if? And so if you remove that, then what you end up doing is you end up building trust and credibility and reliability and loyalty, because people go, oh, you showed up when I needed you and you made it easy and helpful and all those different sort of things. And like going, regardless of what happens, I am sticking with you because you saved me when I
Yep.
needed saving.
Yep. And then the fear
And
of, I guess, versus other brands and
right,
things. Yep.
but that's not sexy.
Well, I don't know.
It's sexy in terms of ROI and return and retention and all those different sort of things, but it's not sexy in terms of a marketing, branding sort of thing.
Yeah,
Um,
I found it quite interesting. I mean, with the number of customers we have and stuff, where yeah, like to wow, to delight, etc. And it's kind of like, hey, people are mostly calling you because like a key element of your service doesn't work. Say, your internet is not working, right? And it goes back to your like experience of the day, right? If I call you, pick up immediately and tell me it's going to be fixed in 6 hours and I'm on the way out, I'm going to be like, cool, okay, done. Not too bad, not too shabby, right? If I'm here waiting to record this thing with you and my internet's not working, like there's no way you're getting anything other than like a 1 out of 5 on CSAT and me, spreading negative
yeah,
sentiment about your brand for like months to come.
for
Um,
years.
yeah, yeah.
That's the thing. For years, it's not just kind of months to come. It's a bit like going. I think there's also a thing around that people don't acknowledge. There's a thing called silent complaints,
Mm-hmm.
right? Let me give you an example. How many times have you been to a restaurant, right, where it was okay, but not great? And
Yeah,
if anybody kind of, so it wasn't bad enough that you were going to complain or you were going to do something on social media or whatever, but if anybody asked you, you'd be like, meh, don't go there.
yeah, yep.
Probably
That's so.
done that kind of tens,
Oh,
if not hundreds of times, right?
well, I
Where
think
you have
I think
that,
one of
and
those
that
like.
those things exist, and people talk about those things, but we can't track it, we can't say it, and
Yeah.
the ratio is huge.
No, you're absolutely right. I think I read one of those like kind of like corny LinkedIn things, but it might have been a LinkedIn, but it was a classic like restaurant owner talking to like their staff, and it was like pay attention to the people showing up for the second and third time the most, because many people show up first time, but where you're really building habit is like second and third, and past that point you can probably then get away with a lot more. But it's really kind of like double down on your winners and build like a positive habit and experience. When you think of like what you do and kind of like people are challenging different assumptions about their customers, I'm particularly interested kind of like these silent complaints and stuff. That sounds very cultural, right? I think that
Mm-hmm.
the way that this works, or what is like a positive endorsement versus a negative one, say in the UK versus the US, That's quite a different thing, right? I
Oh,
mean, the number of times I've had Americans go like, "Oh my God, that's great. I love that." And then I'm like, here's something else. I'm like, you don't really love that in comparison to kind of like, if you heard I love that from a person in the UK, that's like quite a ringing endorsement, right?
I
Like, how
know.
do you think about all that?
But I think that's the thing is that the when you lean into it and you think about you ask yourself, well, what does great service or what does a great experience look like? Um, there's a there's a problem in that many people make an assumption that great service and great experience looks the same wherever you are in the world, and it's not true. You know, different communities, different cultures, different people in different countries speaking different languages have very, very different experiences or very, very different sort of outlooks and preferences. And so that's where it gets really complicated. Um, and that's where you have to not come with a cookie cutter approach, that you actually have to you have to go and speak to customers and
Yeah.
really understand what's going on. You have to go and observe them. You have to speak to them. You have to interact with them. And um, I think it's like your data I think, will only tell you so much. And sometimes you actually have to, as leaders, you have to go out and and really investigate this to get like a visceral connection to the experience that you want to create and see it in the wild in many ways. And I don't think there's enough leaders that do that, sort of spend time with either speaking to or observing customers or hanging out with those people um, that are that are serving your customers, that are
Yeah.
delivering to them or answering their phone calls, or responding to their emails or whatever, or serving them in a shop or whatever it might be.
Do you have a good anecdote, just kind of like from any of the kind of like engagements you've had where like talking to kind of like frontline staff surfaced something that was almost like obvious to them, but not to the management?
There's an insurance company in Australia, and as part of our leadership away day type of thing, they organized for a whole bunch of those leaders to go down to the contact center where they set up this big conference room, and there was a whole bank of phones and things, and they wanted them to call customers. Now,
Yeah.
that would kind of like going to frighten kind of most people, because it's like they were like, oh, but here's what they wanted to do. This is how they wanted to frame it. They gave them a little script, and um, they were to go and call the customers, but they were going to call customers that had given them a really great review. They said it was a great job, da da da, all this sort of stuff. So rather than focus on the complaints, let's focus on the brilliant ones. But here's the trick: they were to call them and say, "Hi, Nicola, how you doing? I just want to kind of call you back for thank you for the great review, and I wanted to ask you a question, if I may. Is I know that such and such a person served you, and I wanted to ask you, if you were to send them a personal message, what would the message be?"
Hmm.
And that, because they introduced themselves as an executive of the company, and they were saying, like, if you tell me what the message is, a short message, I'll write it down and I will hand deliver it to the agent. So they made a couple of calls, had all these kind of cards that they need to go, and they went around the organization and hand delivered it. The impact was enormous, because what it did is it took kind of the distance between senior execs and people that were serving customers, and it just smashed all
Hmm.
the walls. And because this was done in public, somebody was coming up and tapping somebody on the shoulders, like, by the way, my name's such and such. I just spoke to the customer you served yesterday. They thought you did a brilliant job. Here's a message that they gave me to pass on to you. And I thought that was just a beautiful example of how you can weave together this whole experience and service and culture and leadership sort of web to try and build new behaviors and habits, and then and collapse all that distance between leadership and the front line.
Yeah. I guess it also sends a very clear signal that it is important and that they care, right?
100%. 100%. But because it's done in public, people are like going, why is that person getting tapped on the shoulder? Like, how can I not get one of those?
Yeah. No, no, absolutely. Absolutely. That's really interesting. It's really like it's a good effort by the company, right? I wish more
I
people
mean,
did.
they did they did give the execs an opportunity to continue that. So they gave them they had the producer facilities or the ability for them to continue kind of to do that on a weekly or monthly basis. And I must say that the drop off was quite dramatic in terms of who kept it up. But there was a cadre of execs that lent into it, and they thought it was a meaningful thing. And so I think it becomes a thing of personal responsibility.
Yeah.
It's not just as much. It is about the thing around. Well, it's not just about what we say is important. It's like what we show is important as well.
No, 100%. And when you think of kind of like your career and kind of like when you started and today and like how customer experience as a whole has evolved, are we further along than you think? Has all this tech and innovation and effort helped, do you think? Or like are we as far along as we should have been?
I mean, well, who knows? I mean, I remember I wrote a thing. Somebody prompted me the other month or so and said, "We're 25 years into the 21st century." And it's like a quarter of the way through the 21st century. I was like, "Blimey!" When you put it like that. And they said, "Well, have you thought about doing something which focuses on the evolution of the retail experience over that time?" And I said, "No, well, let me think about that." And so I did. And I thought about kind of how things have developed. I mean, crumbs. At the turn of the century, online shopping was a very new thing,
Yeah.
right? I mean, and most of it was done on dial-up. Anybody remember dial-up? Who'd take that now? And then, how things have changed around, the introduction of mobile phones, smartphones, but particularly kind of with the evolution of the introduction of 3G and then 4G and now 5G and all of those different sort of things. And I think it's fascinating how far we've come, and what we've had to navigate, what with, the financial crash and the of 0708 and then the recession that followed after that, and then we had the kind of COVID and pandemic and all these sort of things. But reflecting on all of that, I think that, I mean, we've come so far. I mean, I think if you asked me in the year 2000, say, tell me what's going to be things are going to be like. I mean, or to ask anybody, would we have been able to predict all of this? Well, no, we probably thought that flying cars would be a thing. And
When it comes to like customer experience, right? Like when you think of like, you're like a large company that existed, say a retailer in year 2000 and today, do you think that like they've done enough to become a better version of themselves? Or
I think there's still people. I think the key thing that's happened is that consumers have adopted technology faster than companies have been able to keep up. 100%. But I think a lot of people kind of assume that everything's really changed around consumer behavior, and I dispute that. I don't think it has. I think that we've changed a little bit, but I think the fundamentals are still the same.
Yeah.
I think we were always seeking value. We want things to be as easy and efficient as they can be, and at the same time, we want to be seen, heard, and respected.
Yeah.
And how that has changed over the last quarter of centuries, all those different things, they have changed, but our desire in each of those sort of domains is the same. We think about personalization and the use of data and privacy and things. Are we being really seen and heard and respected? By some, yes.
But I mean, when you look at like, I feel like there was like a world, and maybe this is like, romanticizing the past, but maybe in a world with like fewer large companies accounting for so much of the services and things we consume, there was an inherent local level of personalization and adaptation that existed. Whereas now, I feel like we first went through this like agglomerization where companies got like bigger, and then they started professing to serve us and to put the customer first. They all became customer obsessed and focused and centric, right? And they worked with consultants and many others to really kind of like up that experience. But I feel like they almost in many ways end up talking about it more than they end up really living it on the ground, because they've not empowered their people to be like reactive to those things.
I think that is very true. I mean, I think that all of the different developments have, and particularly with the rise of the internet and e-commerce and things, and all the economics that go with that, we've seen a demise of, or rather not a demise, a radical changing of the kind of the local
Yeah.
commerce base and the local, say, high street in most sort of towns and cities. Um, and yes, that personal touch is where we would get the personal touch there. I think that brands have always struggled um, to deliver that personal sort of touch or that personalization touch at scale. And
'Cause
because I think the thing
they
that
deliver-
they
yeah.
they get wrong is they put their bottom line results over and above anything else.
Yeah. I guess like in doing and improving on those at a scale, they do provide, an experience or a product at scale more cheaply and, more efficiently than those local guys could have, right? But then I feel like we've implicitly accepted to have like a generic product and
Hmm. But I do think there's ability. What's interesting is what we've also seen is we've seen in that in evolving landscape, we've also seen people coming up with creative ways to compete.
hmm
And I think that's always been that will continue to be the case because I think what's really interesting is how that the retail landscape I think has changed. But I think kind of 25 years ago, kind of probably over the 25 years, it's changed from being, I think, largely bell curve shaped,
yeah,
where you had very few low value players and very few luxury kind of players, and everything was in around the middle. And then it flipped, and you've got people that go, we'd have to do value at scale, and
yeah,
then we can do luxury, sort of, the explosion of luxury brands. And if you're caught in the middle,
yeah,
you're toast. And so consumers are like, generally people are, we like to purchase on value, but the regular consumers are going, I'm going to purchase on value because I have to manage a budget, but I'm also going to be looking over here for the nice things to have every now and again when I can afford them.
yeah.
And if you
No,
don't,
you're
if you
right.
haven't, if you haven't thought about that, and you don't sort of think about how that you respond to that and what service and experience looks like in those two different sort of domains, and it's relative to those domains, then you look kind of slightly directionless.
No, you're right, because I mean, I guess what's really happening with technology, rather than it being used to improve that middle layer, it allows the wide, more scaled kind of like bottom layer to improve so much that I wonder if at a certain point, like a bank with a really good app where you can, like a few click to get a loan, etc., became a better experience than, I don't know, a Swiss private bank that has a banker on call, but they don't work day or night, like, and they can't get you an answer day or night, whereas the app might be able to, right? And then at
Yeah.
some point they challenge those guys, and then they again like flip around, like who gets to be the luxury item?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to a guy recently who had put together a solution where they'd worked with the bank, where they were able to employing it's like a human plus tech collaboration sort of like space, but it had memory and it was something that people can go back to, and it worked 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and because it was people can collaborate and do different sort of things according to, like, say, loan applications and things.
Yeah, yeah,
They were able to put $250 million worth of business through that channel
yeah. Wow. Okay. Wow.
just because they just looked at it from a processing perspective and where people needed to weigh in, and where automation and an intelligent agent can kind of do things, how people can self-service, how do you signpost people to the right sort of things to get them to come back and do that, what documentation needs to upload and so on and so forth, when they needed to schedule a call with an advisor and so on and so forth. It just worked. It was beautiful.
Yeah,
$250 million worth of extra revenue.
yeah. No, no, no. That is a mighty number.
And I think the thing that I would say about all of that, it's like that's the technology was brilliant, but the key thing about it was almost imagining kind of what it is we want to kind of create,
Yeah.
and how can we use the technology to bring that to life.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, for a while, I think until the marketing team rated me, and my whole notion was like superhuman customer experience, right? And not superhuman because it's better than humans. In some ways, it's far better. In some ways, it's vastly inferior, right?
Mhm.
I think it's really like technology can allow you to do some things like that, like memory layer there, if done right. And I bet it wasn't easy to make it flow and like do all
No,
the things it had to do. But once you have it, it will be better than a human, because a human at scale cannot have that for every single customer. Whereas you might be able to as a brand if you build the technology for it.
yeah. And I think that's the thing is that we've got some amazing tools that are available to us, and some of the stuff that's coming out that you guys are at the forefront of developing around sort of voice AI and things is truly remarkable about where it can be deployed and how it can be used and things. But I think it's incumbent on us to imagine what it
Yeah,
is we want to deliver.
yeah,
Because we're a bit like if we're sculptors or we're carpenters or we are painters or whatever, is that we see, you know, like Michelangelo didn't start with a chisel and just went, I will see what happens.
yeah, yeah,
Right? He goes like, I know what David looks like, and
yeah,
I'm now going to create David out of that,
yeah.
release David from that piece of stone based on
Mm,
the kind of the tools that he's going to use. And I think that is, I think I get my artists and statues kind of right. I think it's Michelangelo and David, is it?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. But I think that the point is that imagine what it is you want to do, but you have to, in order to help you understand what the art of the possible is, you have to educate yourself
Yeah.
around the tools. But don't be led by the tools, be led by the vision, and then pick the tools in order to bring the right sort of tools to bring that vision to life.
Mm. That's a wonderful. Uh, that's kind of like a wonderful visualization to leave it on. But yeah, I think that like yeah, how the product flows through everything, including the like CX channel, really is like, and we see it with a lot of our customers and kind of like how they approach things, what they prioritize within their CX estate. So you're completely right about that. Look, Adrian, thank
Awesome.
you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure
My
as always.
pleasure.
Thank you for sharing everything with us, and hope to have you again as we kind of like see what AI does to the field of CX, and hopefully it's not just people doing tech for the sake of tech, and more kind of like in reacting to the problems they really have.
100%. And thank you so much for having me on.
It was a pleasure. And to everyone watching, like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.